Hi, I'm Steve Davis, physician and Director of Courses at Diploma MSc, and I'd like to welcome you on our induction program, which is designed to help our students through the process of navigating and interacting with the Diploma MSc courses that you've chosen to study. First of all, I'd like to thank you for choosing our program. I know there's many programs out there that you could have elected, so we want this to be the best for you. Therefore, please do interact with the program. You will find that there will be presentations from many of our senior academic staff, and the idea is that it'll provide you with a good introduction of how to study online and also how to interact with the website. And of course, it sets our expectations as well in terms of what you need to do to be successful on the course. Importantly, also, please do interact with the lectures, because our students support staff are here to help you. So if you do have questions, fire those off. We welcome those, and our support staff will be there to interact with you live online to answer those queries where possible. It is important that you do interact because we learn as much from you as you do from us, and it's our constant drive to try and continually improve what we can offer the student to help them. So I hope you enjoy it. Thanks very much for studying us, and we look forward to seeing you on the course.
Hello everybody, my name is Ruth Davis and I'm Academic Director with Learner, and in this session I am going to give you a brief introduction to the MSc, and then I'm going to talk about Module 1, which is about research methodologies and critical appraisal. In academia we talk about an academic currency, and we talk about credits or CAT points. One CAT point is equivalent to 10 notional hours of study, and a master's degree is 180 credits or CAT points. You will already have done 120 CAT points by doing the postgraduate diploma. So the second year is topping that up to the full masters, and that is made up of Module 1, which is 20 credits, and Module 2, which is 40 credits. In Module 1, we look at the different research methodologies that are available and how to critically appraise the literature and the research, and it lasts over a period of 10 weeks. There are 8 taught weeks, and the structure is similar to what you will have experienced in the postgraduate diploma. Module 2 is twice the size and the effort. It's over 28 weeks and has a very different format. It's very much more self-directed, and it will be about you choosing your project and having individual supervision with your supervisor. So if we look at Module 1, the first thing I should say is that the learning outcomes for your particular subject area may be slightly different, but generally speaking, what we're aiming that you should be able to do by the end of the module is to be able to critically analyse research and apply it to your subject area, Some of you will have a learning outcome of applying different methodological perspectives, and we want you to be able to choose the right research approach to answer the research question that you are going to be setting yourself in Module 2. And we want you to be able to display a critical understanding of the clinical implications of the research that you're reading and look at its impact on healthcare delivery or service development. So the format for Module 1 should be very similar to what you've experienced in the postgraduate diploma. It comprises the academic forum, which you might also have heard described as a discussion forum, and that comprises 40% of the module mark. There's a reflective journal, which is 10%, module activity, which is 20%, and the end of module examination, which is 30%. It's the combination of all these assessments that gives you the final mark for the module. If you want further guidance on each one of these assessment types, go to the instructions and resources on the course website. The academic forum accounts for 40% of the module mark, and each week there is a different subject area. We start off in week 1 by looking at quantitative research methods. In this type of research, you're more likely to have randomized controlled trials, large numbers, where you can make generalizations and looking at cause and effect. In week 2, we look at qualitative research, which tends to look in more detail. They have small sample sizes. They're not trying to make generalizations, but they're trying to get rich data which helps you to understand what's going on in a given situation. There's less emphasis on being able to generalize the findings. And quite often you'll find that studies are using mixed methods. They combine quantitative and qualitative approaches. In week 3, we're looking at epidemiology and statistical interpretation. One of the big things that you'll find when you're reading research is to be able to detect whether they've used the right statistical tests and whether they have interpreted the statistics in a meaningful way. On to week 4, it naturally lends itself then to how do you interpret the evidence that's being presented in research studies. In week 5, we look at meta-analysis and systematic reviews. Meta-analysis would be where you pool different studies and you try to draw out themes or common grounds from the research that's been reviewed. It's also helpful to look at appraising the evidence, and we cover that in week 6, interpreting, weighing and synthesizing the evidence. Then we also look at different ways of improving practice. Research is a very important way of setting a question to which you don't know the answer and trying to find out what that answer is. But other ways of improving practice are to start off with something that you do know is good practice and seeing how well you do against that standard. And then how do you put in governance measures to make sure that the practice is as good as it can be, and if there are problems, what could be done about it. And that also rolls into quality improvement measures that can be made for practice. And then we round off with looking how you can prepare yourself for the research proposal and the professional project that you're going to do in Module 2. And around that area, we're looking at how do you submit an ethical proposal, what are the areas of probity that you need to consider, how do you structure your literature search so that you have a method that is reproducible, and that will be an important part of the module in the professional project that you cover in the next Module 2. The reflective journal, you will be familiar with the format for that, but what we want you to do in this module is to focus on research. So at the outset, be honest about how you feel about research, about what your learning needs are. It might be, for example, that you think, I'm freaked out by quantitative research. All those statistics and maths really throw me. Or it might be that you're more confident in doing the mathematical side of things and you don't like the more feely side of qualitative research. Be honest about how you feel about this. Then you might want to set yourself goals, what you want to do. You in the reflective journal, remember that you're speaking in the first person. You can be much more subjective about how you feel about things, and then you can monitor how you're doing. You might want to look at the learning outcomes for the module and see how far you feel that you have met them, or what sorts of things you want to investigate during the module. We do like you to use a structure to your framework, so describe what you're thinking, tell us how you're feeling about it, analyse what you're feeling. Are there new areas that you need to explore? What are your priorities for the module? And then come to a conclusion about it at the end. We do provide some structure for your reflection, and here are two examples. You might want to use something like Borton's framework, where you're saying what is it that you are intending to examine or thinking about, what's the significance of it, oh God, it doesn't really make sense, does it? It's quite difficult to do this, right? Right. We do provide some examples of structure for your reflection. You might want to use Borton framework or Gibbs framework, and again there is more detail on using these frameworks on instructions and resources on your course website. But the intention is that you describe what goes on, you talk about how you feel about it, you evaluate it, you analyse it, you come to a conclusion, and you talk about how you feel at the end of it, or how you might do things differently, or how you feel you have progressed in the area that you have described. For the module activity, for module 1 of the research methods and critical appraisal, it will either be a group activity or an individual activity, and you will have the eight weeks in which to complete it. On the slides here you can see two possible examples. An individual report might be writing an abstract for a research meeting, or a group activity might be asking you as a group to evaluate the role of social media in whatever your subject is, or you might be given a subject. In a group activity, we like you to identify a group leader very early on, and the task is about meeting the topic that you're given, but also how you work as a group. The end of module exam you can access between weeks 8 and weeks 10. The slight difference in this module is that the exam is over an hour and a half as opposed to an hour in the PG Dip, and it is still 30 questions. The reason why it's a little bit longer is that, based on student feedback on previous courses, they have found that they need a little bit more time to answer the same number of questions in this particular module. So, in summary, for module 1, we ask you to contribute to the weekly discussion topics. We want you to be engaged, give prompt submissions, make your postings relevant, maybe apply them to your own practice area, or take the group discussion forward and ask your colleagues how it is where they are. Quality is more important than quantity. For the reflective journal, we ask you to post at least every week, and we want you to structure the way in which you write your reflection. For the group activity, make sure that you complete it in time, that is by the end of week 8, whether it's a group or an individual activity. And then finally there is the end of module exam. By the end of the module then, you should be prepared to go ahead onto module 2 of the professional project for the MSc. All the best with the course.
Welcome to the presentation about using library resources at the University of South Wales. My name is Lou Wallace and I'm one of the faculty librarians at the university. I look after your courses, so that means I liaise with your academics to make sure that we've got resources for you. It also means that I'm here to support you while you're on the course. So if you have any questions after today, you're welcome to contact me and my contact details are on the slide. The university has 4 physical libraries, and if you live close enough to be able to use these, all you'll need is your USW student card. That is your library card as well. The opening hours of each library is available on the website, and for those of you, and I appreciate this is most of you, who won't be able to use the USW libraries in person, there is a scheme called Sconnell Access. Sconnell Access allows you to use the facilities and borrow books from other university libraries in the UK. The website address is www.sconnell.ac.uk/Sconnell Access. If you then select Distance Learner and University of South Wales on the homepage, you'll see a list of participating universities local to you. Simply fill in the form and send it through and you'll get a card to use your local library. It is of course possible though to be an active library user without actually setting foot in a physical library, as so many resources are available online, and it's going to be the online resources that I'm focusing on today. To use the online resources, you will need to set up a password. If you haven't already done this, then go to the main USW webpage and click Login. You'll then be prompted to set up a password using the self-service account administration. You can also use this to change your password at any time. And to log into all of the library resources, your username is simply your 8-digit student number and then the password that you have set up. Reading lists can be accessed in Moodle. Some links, those which are freely available online, can be accessed directly from your reading list. Other links, those which are behind the paywall of university resources and ones that we subscribe to, will take you in to find it. Once you're in Find It, you'll need to log in. The link is up here, and once you're logged in, you'll see your name in the top right hand corner, and then you'll be able to access the resource by clicking on the link in the middle of the page.
While your reading lists are great for the core resources, you will be expected to supplement this with your own reading around the subject areas. So what we're going to do now, we're going to have a little look at the library website. We're then going to look at using Find It to search for a book.
This is the library website. It can be accessed via Moodle or just by Googling USW Library. The main box in the middle of the page is Find It, and this is where you'll find all of our resources, and I'll show you that in more detail shortly. First of all, I'm just going to walk you through this page. So on the side here, you've got a link to chat. If you have any questions relating to library services or things are not working when you're using them, there's a chat service available 24/7. Click on the link and type in the box to start a conversation with myself or one of my colleagues. Underneath that, you've got the book an appointment link. So if you want to make an appointment with me, if you click there and go through to Lou, you'll get a list of dates and times that I'm available. If there's nothing there that suits you, just give me an email instead, and appointments can be booked in person or via Skype or via email. Underneath that, we've got the A to Z of library services. Lots of useful information in there if you've got a question relating to the library. And in the bottom of the page, we have some useful information about different aspects of library services. So we've got a borrowing link here. This tells you all the information about returns, renewals, requests, so on and so forth. So if you are going to be using the physical library, familiarise yourself with that information first. You've got a range of useful guides under the library guides link. Here you'll see guides to find it, subject specific guides. Really important, you've got the USW Harvard referencing guide. You will be expected to reference your assignments in USW Harvard. There's a getting started guide for all of the basic stuff that I've gone through today. Guide to Bob, which is our online TV and radio service. Lots of useful television content and available in the UK. Information about different aspects of library services and information here about research. So there's guides here how to research, a Google Scholar, and lots of really helpful stuff. You've also got the contact information here, and under part-time, at distance and partners, we have a guide to distance students. If you click on that, you'll see relevant information for those of you based in the UK and those of you based outside of the UK. One thing just to mention is the Wi-Fi. We're part of a global Wi-Fi network service called Eduroam. So to log into it, it's your student number at southwales.ac.uk and then your normal university password. It's a worldwide Wi-Fi network, so if you do use universities over the globe, you should be able to pick up the Eduroam network. Now I'm going to look at searching for books in Find It. Find It, the box in the middle of the page, allows you to search USW's collections. Either put your keywords in here or click on the link to Find It to go directly in. Once in Find It, make sure that you sign in using the link at the top of the page. You'll then see your name in that top corner. And what that means is you'll be able to access everything that you should be able to, and also you'll be able to use the full functionality of Find It. Type your search terms into the box. And you can choose at this point to search everything, which is absolutely everything, all of the books and all of the journals, libraries, which is the titles of the books and the titles of the journals, or journal articles, which is the full text of all of the journal articles. Because I'm looking for a book, I'm just going to refine my search to libraries. And you can see on this left hand side there are some refining features here, so you can refine it to a particular library, you can refine it by date, and more importantly, if you're an online student, you can refine it to just those books that are available electronically. We do try and buy all of your core books electronically, so hopefully you'll be able to find many of them within Find It or via your reading list. However, unfortunately, not everything is available electronically, so there may be some books that we aren't able to get hold of, in which case you will need to source them from elsewhere. In this instance, I'm just going to refine it to full text online, and I'm going to choose this top one here. And if you follow the links then, that will take you into the item record. On this page here, you'll see some useful stuff. You see a permanent link, so if you are going to be needing to get back to it. You can also get a citation, which I mentioned earlier you will be expected to reference in USW Harvard. This is a normal Harvard citation, so you will need to adapt it to USW Harvard, but it has got all the information that you need to do USW Harvard referencing. You can also email it to yourself, and you can also add things to your favourites by using the pin at the top, and I'll go into more detail about that shortly. To access the book, there's a link here. Click that, that takes you away from Find It into the page of the ebook provider. This one comes from somewhere called Dawson Era. You don't need to worry about that, that's just where we've bought it from. What you're looking for is an icon to either download it or to read it online. All books will have one, if not both of those options. If you read it online, you'll see it opens the book exactly the same as the print version. Go through the pages, you can go through the contents, you can search within the book and get a little bit of context. You can write notes. You can also cite a copy and print up to 10% or one chapter. So if you are going to be referencing this in an assignment, you can just copy and paste directly in. If you try and do more than a chapter or 10%, you'll get a copyright warning message. If you haven't used ebooks before, good idea just to have a play around with them, get used to navigating them, get used to reading them on screen. Hopefully you'll find them as straightforward as we do. I'm now going to look at using Find It to discover journal articles. Before we look at looking at journal articles, I do want to talk a little bit about search strategy. So before you start any assignment, it's a good idea to have a little think about it. What are you writing? Are you writing a report? Are you writing an essay? How many words is it? Because the more words, the more references you're going to need. Also, how much do you know about the topic? If you don't know very much, you might want to read some of the core textbooks before you start searching for journal articles to enable you to get effective keywords. And your keywords are the most important part of your search strategy. The better your keywords, the better your results are going to be. To break it down, don't enter whole assignment titles into the search engine. Pick out a handful of keywords and then brainstorm any related ones that you can think of. For example, if you were looking at teenagers, you'd also want to use adolescent and young person to bring back relevant results. Think about broader and narrower terms. Think about different spellings and think about different terminology. Just spend a few minutes brainstorming your keywords before you start searching. It will save you a lot of time in the long run. And what we have on this slide is just a few examples of things you might want to consider. Also consider your search boundaries. Are you interested in a specific geographical area, a particular time period, or are you just looking to keep it as current as possible? And which group of the population are you looking at? Once you've got your keywords, you want to consider how you're going to search. This is a link to the library's research guide, which includes a page on searching techniques. The link is up here, libguides.southwales.ac.uk/research. And this includes things like Boolean logic, so the and the or and the not, truncating words to find different endings and searching for phrases and so on and so forth. Have a good look at this guide before you start searching and consider using these searching techniques to enable you to search more effectively and efficiently, and have this at your side when you're doing your searches. Once we've considered our keywords and our searching techniques, then it's time to look for some journal articles. In Find It, you can refine your search to articles here. I would always click on Advanced Search because that gives you a few more options in terms of putting your keywords in, and then pop in your keywords. So I'm going to look for adolescent or teenager or child, and I'm going to look in the title field because I want that to be core to my article, and then I'm going to pop in type 2 diabetes. And I'm going to do that as a phrase. If you look in the guide to searching techniques, it will explain that in there. I'm also going to search. I'm going to refine that to the last 5 years because I want to keep it nice and current, and click search. And you'll get a list of results then. We've got 59. There are refining features down this left-hand side, so you can refine it by subject, you can refine it to specific journal titles, you can also refine it to those that have been peer-reviewed, different functionality there for you. And this is, I just want to elaborate a little bit on the favourites. So you'll notice that every record has got a pin by it. If you click that pin, it saves it to your favourites area. Your favourites can be accessed at any point in time by clicking the big pin at the top of the page. And you'll see here a list of everything that I've got in my favourites. Definitely worth anything that you use, just popping it in your favourites, and you know then that you will always be able to get back to it. When you've come across a journal that you want to look at, if you click on the title, that will take you into the item record, just like with the book. So you've got the permanent link and you've got the citation, and just like with the electronic book, there is a link away from Find It into the journal article this time instead of the book, and a link to it there. So here we have the whole journal article. When you're in a journal article, if you do Control and F, it gives you a little search box, so you can look for your keywords within the article then and work out whether or not it's going to be worthwhile you reading it. You've of course got the abstract here to have a little look at as well. Find It, as a resource discovery tool, searches all of our collections and is a great starting point for any assignment. It cross-searches all of the individual databases we subscribe to. This is things like CINAHL, Medline, Cochrane, things that you will probably have used before. You may want to search these individually in addition to Find It for a number of reasons. Firstly, the databases allow you to refine your search more thoroughly. Secondly, the databases search a discrete range of subject-specific resources. These may offer you a more manageable range of relevant results than Find It, which cross-searches everything that university has. And thirdly, Find It only searches our full text collections, and in the databases you'll find other things not in our collections that are relevant to your assignments. To access the databases, first check that you're logged in. If you're logged in, click Find Database at the top of the screen, and from the A to Z list you can choose a subject that's relevant to you. So I'm going to go for nursing. What you'll see then is the core database is highlighted at the top in yellow, along with some more general ones at the bottom. Each database has got a short description along with some identifiers, so you should be able to work out whether or not it's relevant to your subject. When you found one that you think is useful, in this case I'm going to have a look at CINAHL, click on the title, and that takes you away from our web page and into the database itself. If you haven't seen CINAHL or a database before, you'll notice here a lot more search functionality than we've got in Find It. Not all of them databases will have all of these options, but they will have some additional options. Lots of the databases also have their own inbuilt thesauruses, so as soon as you start typing, it gives you suggestions for things that you might want to be looking for, and also suggests alternative keywords. I'm just going to refine my search to title and click search. You can refine your search by date, so we're going to refine it to the last 5 years. And you see here you can also refine it to all the things we discussed earlier, but also you can refine it to academic journals. You'll notice in the database, whereas in Find It everything had a link, some of these have got a full text link. So this one here has. And others haven't. And if there isn't a link to the full text, that doesn't mean we haven't got it. That just means we haven't got it within our CINAHL subscription. So the next thing you would need to do is check Find It, either by clicking the check Find It for full text link, or if there isn't one of those available, just copy the title and paste that into the search box on Find It. And if we search Find It for this journal article, we'll find out then whether or not we've got it through one of our other collections, and we haven't. If we did have it through a different provider, there would be a link here. If there isn't one available, there is a link to the British Library request form. You can do 5 free British Library requests per academic year. So anything that you want that we haven't got, just click on the link, fill in the form, send it through, choose digital delivery, and we'll have a copy emailed to you within a couple of days. 5 for free, after that it's £3 a pop. Just something to note quickly though, before you do that, it is always worthwhile just copying the title and popping it into Google Scholar. Lots of content is indexed on Google Scholar, and you do find things like ResearchGate, university archives, charity archives, so sometimes you can find things on Google Scholar that you can't find in Find It. So I just mentioned Google Scholar. Google Scholar is a good supplement to your Find It and database searches, as it indexes university and charity repositories as well as many other sites. And you can set it up to work with Find It by using library links. If you go into the Scholar settings and library links and then just highlight the box that says Find It at University of South Wales and save it, then any searching that you do in Google Scholar if we've got the article through Find It, there'll be a link to it. Just see here, it's also finding links from other places. So these are things that are not on Find It, where the article is freely available to you. The other nice thing that Google Scholar does, it gives you citations. So any article that you find, you can have a look and see if it's been cited by any newer articles. And then if you click on that link, it tells you what those articles are. Definitely worthwhile having a look. Often they can find other stuff that's useful, and also you can check and see if an article that's a little bit older is still being cited currently. So finally, thanks very much for listening. I know I've covered a lot of information in a short space of time, but the content will be available in Moodle for you to rewatch and consult when you're searching on your own, and please don't hesitate to get in touch with the library or me. Good luck on your course.
So in this session we're going to talk about MSc Module 2, the Professional Project. I would like you to look at your course learning outcomes because they will vary slightly, but just to give you a feel for what we're expecting you to have achieved by the end of this module. We are hoping that by the end of the module you will be able to produce an extended piece of work which could be submitted to a journal for publication. If you get a good mark for the professional project, you might want to talk with your tutor about getting your work published. This would help you and in your own personal and professional development, and help to establish you as a leader in your subject area. We would like by the end of this course for you to be able to recognise and implement best evidence-based practice or best practice. We'd like you to be able to critically evaluate practice and suggest how things can be improved and changed. And the intention is that you should be able to incorporate your knowledge of the research process in developing services appropriately, or if not the research process, then a process of change which will lead to improved services. Now, the professional project has a different structure to all the other modules that you undertake. It's more self-directed, and the majority of the time you will be just dealing with your supervisor. So it's very important that you establish a good and regular, frequent contact with your supervisor. It's never too early to start thinking about your topic choice. Even before you start the year, choosing the topic is quite challenging. It's not like doing an essay where you're given a topic and you have to talk to that topic. You have the freedom to choose something that interests you and will take your professional development further forward. So take the time to think about what topic you could choose, and then in the early stages of the module you refine that with your supervisor. Before you start the module, also look at the library and make the most of using it. Take the time to find out how to do a literature search. For your professional project, you will not be able to make the most of the literature if you only look at abstracts. So you must have the full text, because otherwise you will not be able to critique the methodology. Find out how to do a library search, how to save things in the library, how to search the databases, how to filter your search so that you can get the most appropriate literature for your topic area, because if you put in the wrong search terms you will get the wrong sort of research. Rubbish in equals rubbish out. The library is there for you as a resource. It also has ways in which you can save your work, so think about how that might help you. So this module has a different structure to other modules. It's much more self-directed and it's over a much longer period of time. For the majority of the module you are dealing one-to-one with your supervisor. It's never too early to think about the topic for your project, and once you start the module, be in frequent contact with your supervisor so that you can refine the parameters for your project. The professional project is not an essay to which you have to respond. You have the option to choose your topic, which means that you have to create a topic that you can do within the time frame that you have. Before the module starts, make sure that you can make the most of the library facilities. Find out how to do a literature search, find out how to refine your search, find out how to filter your searches. If you put the wrong keywords into a literature search, you will get the wrong information out. Rubbish in equals rubbish out. So make sure that the library is working for you. Think about how to reference. We have on the course website referencing guides, and how to weigh up and appraise the evidence critically. Remember that the professional project is an academic piece of work, so you will need to write in the third person. So you will be saying things like, this paper says, or Smith and Jones said such and such. You will not be saying, I think this, or in my opinion. Predominantly you will be writing in the third person. So how do you go about choosing a suitable project? Well, we want you to be creative. Think about things which will benefit you in your work and in your subject area, but do it in conjunction with your tutor. And pick a project that is manageable. One of the most frequent difficulties that students have is that they want to change the world. You only have a limited amount of time, and it's more important that you learn about the process for this course so that you can enact that when the course finishes. We do not recommend that you choose research which involves human subjects or requires ethical committee approval. The reason is not because we don't trust you, it's not because we don't think you can do it. It's primarily because you will have to submit your work to a committee, and that timescale is out of your control. We have found in the past that by submitting to an ethical committee, if everything is not crystal clear to them and they will not be subject experts in your area, they may come back with queries, and that whole process elongates the process of doing the project, and that is out of your control. We do not want to set you up to fail, and those are the reasons why we are suggesting strongly that you don't do primary data collection. It's very easy in a long time scale to think, I've got plenty of time to do this. But a project of this size takes time, and you have to think about how you're going to cut it up into pieces that make the project manageable. You cannot leave this until the last weekend and then write it in a hurry. So we recommend putting it into chunks or pieces, agreeing that with your tutor so that it becomes a manageable project without you panicking at the last minute. So what we've got on this slide is some topics or some approaches to your project that you might find helpful. I would say that the majority of students choose a literature review and an appraisal of the evidence. So for this you would choose a topic area and you look at the literature, primarily the research literature. However, it might be that you're a GP in general practice and or you're a nurse or a dietitian and you want to look at your own practice area, and it is possible to look at an audit of your practice. In an audit, remember, you know what the standards are, and then you're measuring your practice against those standards, and you have to use the audit cycle. You have to show reflection on your practice, show from the literature maybe how things could be different, and plan how you're going to take forward your results. But you can also do a literature review plus. So I would say that a review of evidence-based practice and a critical appraisal of its implementation would be a literature review plus how has that worked out either in your own practice or in your own country or in your own area. Or you could do a literature review plus the development of a research protocol. I did say that we don't encourage people to do primary data collection, but you could use this course to do all the groundwork so that you are fully prepared to go for funding so that you can carry out a research project at the end of this course. A different tack might be to look at a business case. You might need an extra piece of resourcing, equipment, staffing, and that would also be a legitimate way of making your area of work go forward in a positive way. Another way of doing it is the other way around, starting with something very specific, a case report of maybe a patient that you've seen, and from that you look at the lessons you can learn, you review the literature, you see what the care should be, and then you can carry out a quality of care assessment. So those are an overview of some of the approaches that you may take to your professional project. The first 8 weeks give you the opportunity to put together your proposal. This ensures that you are on the right track. It makes you decide what your topic area is so that you don't go to the last minute before you do it. And it gives you confidence that you're heading off in the right direction, and us confidence that you're on the right lines and that you have an idea of where you're heading. This proposal constitutes 10% of your module mark. The word limit varies slightly from course to course, so check it, and you should be within about 10% of the word count that you're given. And by the end of that 8 weeks, we want you to have the title of your project, the reason why you've chosen that, how you're going to go about addressing the topic that you've chosen, how you are going to analyse the data or your method of evaluation, some references, and that's as much for us to check that you're on the right lines, for checking the right sort of literature and that you can reference appropriately. And as I previously mentioned, because this is an elongated project, we suggest that you develop a Gantt chart or a timeline, so you show how you are going to section off your work so that you meet in intermediate targets in the development of your overall project. So, the main professional project. Again, the word count varies slightly from course to course, so check the total for your own course. But in the remaining time that you have, you can expect your tutor to have a look at what you have done for a chapter and for a draft, complete draft. But you should not be expecting your tutor to correct spelling or grammar or typographical errors. We recommend that you have somebody who has not read the work before to proofread it, to help you see the wood for the trees. We strongly recommend that the overall draft of your work is reviewed by your tutor, but not at the last minute, and I'll come and explain why at the end of this session. Now on this slide I've got the format for submission. This gives you both the sort of format that we expect. It might vary slightly depending on what you've chosen. Obviously, if you've chosen to do a business case, the headings are going to be slightly different. But for the majority of you who are doing a literature review, when you submit this to the university, you will have a title page which will have the title of your project, your student enrolment number, and the award that you're going for, and the word count. On the second page, you may want to acknowledge your partner, your cat, your rabbit, or whatever. You don't have to do that. Even your tutor might be a good idea. Then on the next page, there's a list of contents. So you should have the subsections together with the page numbers. And then the main body, which should include things like the abstract, the introduction and background, the area that you've chosen or research question that you're going to address, how you're going to go about doing it in the methods, presentation of the results, a discussion about the results, the conclusion, and then references and appendices. So taking each one of those in turn, the abstract is a small summary or précis of the whole project. That includes your results. And it is included, the words are included in the word count. It's only about 250 words. So you do the whole project, and then once it's complete, you summarise it right at the start. I always remember when I was a student, I didn't want to put in my results because I didn't want people to just read the abstract. I wanted them to read the whole work. But this is a requirement. Don't forget to put in your conclusion into the abstract. Next, you're setting the scene. Remember that this is not an essay that you are trying to answer the question that you have been set. You are setting the parameters. So you need to provide the context, and you also need to say what you are going to include and what you're not going to include. It will be very obvious to you what you're going to do, but remember that the person that reads your work is coming to it blind, and they will actually come with some preconceptions about what they expect you to be dealing with. So you should be very clear about what you are going to include and what you're not going to include. So it might be, for example, I'm afraid this will come through in the topic, the whole session is that my subject area is diabetes. It might be then that you want to say this will not include children, or it might not include type 1 diabetes, depending on what you're choosing. Do feel free to use tables or images where it's appropriate, and that applies throughout the whole of the work, and use a Harvard style of referencing. Now, in each of the slides we've given guidance about a word count, but it is only guidance. Please don't feel this is cast in stone, because depending on what method you've chosen, or what subject area, the word sections will vary. But because it's a frequently asked question, we've just given some guidance. So what about the research question or topic itself? If it's a research question, you will set it up, and this example here is a topic that a student really did choose. Should mindfulness-based intervention be used as an adjunct to diabetes self-management education? So that's a clear question which the student answers. But it might be more of a generic topic. So you're just setting out a topic area, or the area you're going to look at. So the role of resistance exercise training in the prevention and treatment of type 2 diabetes, or the therapeutic effects of GLP-1 agonists. So the method section. So I can imagine if you're doing a literature review, you're thinking, well, how is there a method in the literature reviewing? Well, there is, because the method section is there so that somebody coming behind you could repeat the work that you've done. So in your method section, you want to explain and justify the approach that you've taken in order to answer your research topic or question. And you want to explain how you're going to go about getting the answer to that question. So for a literature review, it will be what databases do you intend to access, the keywords that you're using, how did you refine your search, what filters are you putting in. Or if you're doing some kind of secondary data analysis, which would also be appropriate, you're going to explain what software you use and how you are going to analyse the findings. Or for a research protocol, you're going to look at the research method you've chosen, why you chose that. Was it qualitative or was it quantitative? What sort of sample would you be selecting? How would you select them? What would be the number in the sample? What would the sample contain? The ethical considerations, how subjects would be recruited, how data would be collected, and how the data would be analysed. So it does depend on what project you've chosen, but your method is very important. And then you go on to the results section. The results section may not be a very long section, but we do want you to report the results accurately and objectively. It's equally important to report negative results or omissions as it is to provide positive results. present the data in a comprehensive fashion. Do feel free to use tables or figures where it helps to describe what you've done, and use images if necessary. The next section is discussion. One of the common problems is that when you write your results, you want to discuss them. And that is a very common mistake to make. We would like to keep the two distinct. The discussion section is where you say, these are the results, but this is what the literature says about it. Why are these findings important? So in your discussion section, you're not going to repeat your results chapter, but you are going to compare the results that you have with literature you've read, other published data, what current thinking is, what current practice is. You're going to discuss what are the limitations of what you did, and where are the gaps, what are the opportunities for doing further research or study. And then there's the conclusion. Very simply, your professional project should have a beginning, a middle and an end. And your conclusion is the end point. So the conclusion is again a summary of your project. This is very important. There should be no new information at this stage. You are just summarising what you've found. Don't go beyond the data. It's very easy to put in here what you really think, but it hasn't actually been shown in what you've found. If you do feel that there is more work to be done, then by all means you can say these are areas for further research. So what questions have been raised by your project and what further work could be done? So now we come on to referencing and appendices. From the abstract to the conclusion, all of those words are included in the word count, but references and appendices are not. It is important that you use Harvard referencing because that is the requirement. You may be more familiar with Vancouver. Don't mix the two up. Revise the styling so that you have it accurate. If you go ahead and publish your work, you will have to conform to a particular journal style. So learn what the style is and use it accurately. Don't forget there are now reference managers such as EndNote or Mendeley, which can help you to order your referencing and get it correct. I'd encourage you to use those. If you do it old style and you're doing it without a reference manager, I strongly recommend that you keep a note of the references as you go along, because proofreading the references at the end is very time consuming, and it is much easier if you use a reference manager. The advantage of Harvard referencing, of course, is that if you're doing it as you go along, it is in the alphabetical order of the first of the surname of the first author. So it doesn't depend on where it appears in the text within your professional project. So you can keep in a separate file your reference list. For the appendices, this might be things like a questionnaire that you have referred to, or maybe a organisational chart that you have referred to, a web page or a screenshot, and none of those things are included in the word count. You have 10% leeway with the word count, and I think that's just about it for referencing and appendices. So, what about the presentation of the work? Well, the standard presentation is to use a 12-point font, have a line spacing of 1.5 to 2 lines, provide a word count which is within 10% of the guidance that you're given. Make sure that if there are university assessment covers that you have to submit, then that you do that. And the guidelines for the presentation are on your course website in more detail. So a reminder of what you can expect from your tutor. All the tutors that supervise the professional projects are experienced at supervising students at master's or PhD level. Do be in regular contact with your tutor. It is important to them as to you that you choose an appropriate topic. You can expect the tutors to read each chapter once and provide general comments, and then provide an overview of the project. But remember, this is quite a large project. You cannot expect the tutor to read 12,000 words or 10,500 words right at the last minute. So you need to give them at least 2 weeks before the submission date if you want them to look at a complete draft. Remember, the tutor will not only be supervising you, and if you're suddenly landed with 10 students giving you 10,500 words, it is an impossible task for them. Again, I would remind you that they are not grammar experts. This is a postgraduate course in a British university. You are expected to get your work proofread. And all of the projects are double marked, and the course directors make sure that the marks are internally consistent across all of the students. So what do we expect from you? Well, make sure that you talk to your tutor right at the start and select a suitable topic. And the way in which you contact your tutor is up to you. It could be by Skype, email, face-to-face, whatever suits the both of you. Do keep a record of your interactions on the course website. That is your audit trail and your evidence base. We recommend strongly for the professional project that you use quality literature sources. That means wherever possible you go back to the primary source rather than using secondary sources, so that's the original author. That where you're doing literature searches, that you look primarily, depending on your subject area, but it will be primarily peer-reviewed journals and predominantly academic sources rather than, say, patient information guidance, which will have taken the academic sources and interpreted it into lay language. We're expecting you to be able to weigh up the evidence and demonstrate critical appraisal. So, final checks before you submit the work. Check that the work meets the module learning outcome, because you will get so immersed in your work that you will not necessarily be able to see the wood for the trees. When you read your work, you will expect something to be there, and you won't see that odd comma that shouldn't be there. You won't necessarily get a sense of whether it's flowing. So get someone else who's less familiar with it to read it through. When you've got it as you think you should, review your research question and ask yourself, how far have you answered the question or topic that you set yourself? And if you find that you are a little off key at that point, then explain that. We're not expecting your work to be perfect, but we do expect you to reflect on the work that you've done. And if you feel you haven't actually quite met your brief, then be honest about that, because we're not expecting at this level for the answers to be black and white. There are shades of grey, knowledge is provisional, and you are on a learning curve. We suggest that you reread your work in the light of the marking grids, which you can find on the instructions and resources page of the course website, because that will help you to understand how the marker will look at your work. Check that your work conforms to the presentation format and guidelines you've been given, and then submit your project on the course website along with your assessment cover sheet. And finally, I'm going to leave you with some examples of projects that students have done previously. Quite often I talk about your professional project being like having a pregnancy. It's full of joys and fears and challenges, but it's a lot of effort, but it is worth the effort, because you get your own little bundle of joy at the end of your professional project. And that is what we hope for you, that not only will you enjoy the experience, but that you will get something very productive out of the end of it, which could take you further forward in your career. So I wish you all the best and enjoy the whole experience.
Hello everybody, and good morning or good afternoon or good evening, whatever time it is of the day, wherever you are in the world. Perhaps I should start by introducing myself. As you can see from my slide, my name is Simon Williams. I'm currently a lecturer at the University of Wales Trinity St David, where I work 2 days a week. I also work for the Iron Bevan University Health Board in their weight management service in a research and evaluation role. And as you can see from the third line beneath my name, I'm also a course tutor on the Postgraduate Diploma and MSc in Obesity and Weight Management. So as you can see from my introductory slide, what I'd like to talk to you all about basically is using the evidence base to try and achieve excellence within the course that you've chosen to follow. Now, I know that some of my colleagues, Dr. New and Dr. Ruth Davis, have spoken to you previously about various aspects of the course. So I fully hope that my presentation will complement the work that Ruth and Carl have done with you previously and give you some further guidance with regard to, as I say, achieving excellence within your chosen course. So the aims of the courses that you've chosen to follow, I guess, have a number of aims. One is to enhance your skills as clinicians and practitioners, but I think from my perspective, one of the very important skills that you need to develop and will be developed as part of studying the postgraduate diploma and potentially subsequently the MSc is the ability to make the best use of the available research and evidence to support the elements of work that you have to submit as part of your course. And that's really what I want to talk to you about. So to help to do that, during this presentation, I'll provide some examples of what I think is required to achieve excellence in the discussion forum and in the reports that you have to submit. And also then to make you aware of some of the potential pitfalls and bad practice that can occur and how to avoid them. And I suppose I should say really that the slides I put together and the content of this talk are largely based around my experience of tutoring for Diploma MSc. Over the years that I've been doing this, I must have read thousands of posts in the discussion forum, and as you can imagine, some of those posts are truly excellent and make very good use of the evidence base. And some of them certainly could be improved. So, as I say, this is largely based on my experience of being a tutor, and hopefully you'll find the guidance helpful. I think by now you would have been told, and you will realise, that there are a number of elements to the course that you're studying. There are weekly case studies and multiple choice questions. There's the reflective journal, which Dr. Davis has spoken to you about. And there's also the group report, the individual report, and the weekly discussion forum. And I think it's these three elements, the group report, the individual report, and the weekly discussion forum, where myself and other tutors will really look to see that you've made good use of the best available evidence that there is to construct your answers and to construct your arguments. So I would say what you need to do is engage with the relevant and the contemporary literature. And by that I mean going beyond just reading that literature and actually engaging in some critical appraisal of the literature and understanding the type of evidence that you're using. Excuse me. So I thought the way I would do this is by using an example in the context of the weekly discussion forum. So again, as you, by now I'm sure you're aware, each week a new discussion topic is started by the tutor in the weekly discussion forum. And as students, you're required to make articulate and evidence-based posts, hopefully at least twice a week. Sometimes people will make more posts than that. I guess depending on other pressures and stresses of work at the time. So one of the modules that I tutor, and one of the modules I've tutored for a number of years, is Module 2 on the Obesity and Weight Management Diploma. And a typical topic or way in which I might start a discussion in the discussion forum is to start with a question as simple as, please discuss the association between obesity and mortality. So I think as students, what you need to do at that point is to stop and to consider what evidence are you going to use in the discussion forum to address this question. As I'm sure you know, the evidence comes in many different forms. We can pick up daily newspapers and read about scientific research and the findings of scientific research, and some of those newspaper articles, I guess, are based on research and therefore are somewhat evidence-based. The internet, of course, is a very rich source of information. Magazines, expert opinion. We all have opinions. Some of us have more expertise than others. I'm sure you'll work with colleagues who are regarded as experts and you listen to their opinions. And these opinions may be solidly based in evidence or they may not. Of course, we have access to textbooks, which hopefully are based on evidence. We have evidence-based digests. But of course, at the top of that list, you'll see scientific publications. And by that, of course, we mean peer-reviewed journal articles and authoritative reports, such as reports coming from the World Health Organization or the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence. And I would put it to you that these, at the top of this list, the scientific publications, particularly in highly ranked peer-reviewed journals, is where we should be searching for our evidence to support and substantiate the arguments that we make, both in the group report, in your independent reports, the individual reports, and also in the discussion forum. So let's just pause for a while and consider the different types of studies and study designs that are used in medicine. And of course, not just in medicine, but in social sciences and in psychology and in many other disciplines as well. And there are a number of ways in which we can classify research in different types of studies. And I've chosen here to keep it relatively simple and straightforward. And I've divided study designs or research into what we describe as primary research and secondary research. By primary research, we're essentially talking about observational studies, which include things like ecological studies, cross-sectional surveys, case control studies, and prospective and retrospective cohort studies. These are studies where the authors, the investigators of this research, have collected primary data, analysed that data, arrived at some kind of interpretation and drawn some conclusions. When you're reading study designs, when you're reading these observational studies, then of course the methodology should tell you what type of study it is you're reading. So even if you can't immediately recognize whether it's a case control study or a cross-sectional survey or an ecological study, there should be some reference to the type of study design used in the methodology. The other kind of primary studies that you will undoubtedly make use of are experimental and quasi-experimental research designs. So typically these are controlled and non-controlled trials, studies that aim to investigate the effect of interventions. And some of these studies will include randomization and some of them won't have randomization. And the second broad group of studies, which I'll talk quite a bit about in this brief presentation, is secondary studies. And by secondary studies, we're really referring to reviews reviews which synthesize and summarize evidence. Sometimes these reviews are narrative reviews and sometimes they are systematic reviews. But the key point I want to make at this here is that when you are engaging in the discussion forum, when you are preparing your group report, when you are preparing your individual report, it's important to know and understand what type of study and what type of evidence you are using. In terms of secondary research, or sometimes people refer to it as desk research, I guess for obvious reasons, this is the kind of research that doesn't require investigators or researchers to actively collect data, but to make use of previously published research or data which already exists. And there are a number of different types of literature reviews. I've mentioned two already, the narrative literature review and the systematic literature review. But we also will encounter literature reviews referred to as meta-analysis, scoping reviews, umbrella reviews, and expert reports. And should you choose to go on to study the MSc once you finish your diploma, then the research methodologies module will go into much greater detail about secondary research and the different types of reviews and how to conduct a systematic review with or without meta-analysis. And I've included a website reference for you on this slide, which I hope you'll find useful, which will provide you with information about different types of reviews and how to critically analyze and interpret the findings of these reviews. I'm sure that many of you will have come across the pyramid which is on the left hand side of the screen as I look at it. It's referred to as the pyramid of evidence, or sometimes the hierarchy of evidence. And you'll see that at the bottom of that pyramid we have, in this case series. Just above that we have cross-sectional studies. Then we have case control studies. We have retrospective cohort studies. Then we have prospective studies. And sitting at the top of that pyramid is the RCT, the randomized control trial. And as I say, I'm sure that many of you would have come across these terms before and will already appreciate that these types of studies are used to address different kinds of questions, and they provide us with different levels of evidence. So if we look at the table on the right hand side of the slide, this is taken from the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, and this is a grading system. And you'll see that at the top of that grading system, level of evidence 1++ are high quality meta-analyses, systematic reviews of randomized controlled trials, or randomized controlled trials with a very low risk of bias. And just beneath that 1 star, we have well conducted meta-analyses, systematic reviews of RCTs, or RCTs with a low risk of bias. So there's not a great deal of difference between the 1 star and the 1 star, other than something to do with the quality and the risk of bias in the studies that have been considered. These are regarded as the highest levels of evidence. So we can, at this stage, go one step further with our pyramid and include at the very top, above RCT, systematic reviews and meta-analyses. But it's also important, I guess, to look to the bottom of the table and to see what kind of evidence is regarded as 2 star, 3 or 4 star. And we see case control studies or cohort studies with a high risk of confounding and bias. We see non-analytical studies, for example, case reports and case series. And we see expert opinion and formal consensus. So the point, again, I wish to kind of reiterate, if you like, is that when you are presented with questions in the discussion forum, when you are attempting to answer your assessments, whether it be the case report or the individual report, it's important to understand the type of study that you're using to address the question, to construct your arguments, where that study sits in the hierarchy of evidence, what level of evidence it presents. So it's worthwhile becoming familiar with grading systems such as the one you can see on the slide, because there are other grading systems which are similar but not exactly the same, and understand the level of evidence that you're using. Okay, so let's return to the topic of discussion, which I started the presentation with. Imagine that we are at the beginning of a week in the discussion forum, and the tutor has presented the question to the group: please discuss the association between obesity and mortality. And I said at this point I think it's a good idea to start to think about what type of evidence are you going to use. So as I mentioned, newspapers often report, especially newspapers in the United Kingdom like the Daily Express, often report headlines like this: obesity is linked to 11 cancers. And this represents, I suppose, some form of evidence. You'd like to think that that headline is backed up by evidence. But should you use this article from the Daily Express to inform your report, or to use it to construct an argument in the discussion forum? I would suggest definitely not. We can certainly look for and find much, much better sources of evidence than daily newspapers. And one of the reasons that, of course, we should avoid using newspapers is exemplified in the study which is presented on the right-hand side of this slide, which reports misrepresentation of the findings of randomized controlled trials in press releases and news coverage. And it says in the conclusion, spin was identified in about half of press releases and media coverage. And the main factor associated with spin in the press releases was the presence of spin in the article abstract conclusion. So essentially what this is saying is that I guess the process which takes place is that often university marketing and press departments will send out press releases based on the research of some of the academics working in those institutions. Those press releases are read by journalists, science journalists in newspapers, and they will report the findings of that study in the newspapers based on what they read in the press release. But we cannot be 100% confident that the press release is accurately reporting the research. And of course, what the press release is unlikely to do is comment on the weaknesses and the limitations of the research. So moving along, if you like, to other forms of evidence, perhaps better than newspapers, but again, I would suggest maybe not the best form of evidence. We can find all kinds of reports on the internet, such as this one on the NHS website in the United Kingdom, which reports that obesity is now a leading cause of death, especially in men. Again, I would suggest not a particularly good source of information, a good source of evidence to use and to cite, to reference in your reports. But on the other hand, you could include it in a discussion forum with some critical analysis. This now looks much more promising. We have an article published in the European Heart Journal, so a fairly highly ranked, peer-reviewed journal specializing in cardiology. The title of the review article seems highly relevant. It's talking about body habitus and the risk of coronary heart disease in men. There are multiple authors from different universities and organizations in the United Kingdom. So, could we use this in our discussion forum? I guess we could, but I would say we can do better. If we look at the date of this particular article, it's 1997. So it's at least, it's more than 20 years old now. So we can certainly look for more contemporary evidence to support the work, the arguments that we're constructing. I also know that if you were to read this article, it lacks any major critical analysis. So it's largely a descriptive review article. So there are much better forms of evidence that we can utilize. Now we move on to an individual, to a primary study rather than an evidence synthesis. This is a paper published, as you can see, in the journal Circulation just less than a decade ago, in the year 2000. Again, a highly ranked journal, peer-reviewed. We can put trust and faith in what we read, hopefully, in this journal. The title is certainly relevant. It's looking at the impact of body mass index as well as metabolic syndrome on the risk of cardiovascular disease and death, but it's very specifically about middle-aged men. So if we think back to the question that we're addressing, what is the association between obesity and mortality? This is certainly relevant, but it only forms part of the picture. It's specifically about middle-aged men. And finally, we move on to this article. This is a 2016 systematic review with dose-response meta-analysis, which is reporting the findings of 230 cohort studies with more than 3.74 million deaths among 30.3 million participants. It's published in a British medical journal. And if we think back a few moments ago to the presentation of the hierarchy of evidence, you'll recall that systematic reviews and meta-analysis sit clearly at the top of the evidence hierarchy. It's contemporary, it's 2016, and also, very importantly, because it's a systematic review, it includes a clear and transparent methodology. And you can see part of the methodology outlined on the right-hand side of the slide. The methodology reports the search strategy and inclusion criteria. It includes study selection, how the authors extracted data and what data the authors extracted, and some of the statistical methods used. So this means we can engage in meaningful critical analysis. We can look at the methods that we used, and we can try our best to draw conclusions about the quality of this systematic review. So just because it's a systematic review and it sits at the top of the hierarchy of evidence, we shouldn't automatically assume that it's high quality. It's for us as academics, as students, as researchers, as scholars, to read this research paper, to use tools which are available to us to make our own conclusions about whether or not this is high quality evidence. Just because it's a systematic review, it doesn't mean we shouldn't engage with the literature and attempt critical analysis. So to come back to the question, what is the association between obesity and mortality? Then I would certainly expect to see in any discussion or in any report addressing that question, this kind of evidence used in constructing answers and arguments. We can take it one step further. I'm not sure how many people are aware of this who have come across this idea, this concept. I mentioned a moment ago the importance of critically analysing systematic reviews and not just accepting them as a systematic review, that they are top of the hierarchy of evidence. But there are methods available to us to critically analyse, to systematically review systematic reviews. So to summarise with some key messages, I would suggest to you that you should be aware of the hierarchy of evidence and that some research designs and studies are stronger than others. But, as I've just been saying, don't take the hierarchy of evidence too literally. You should attempt some level of critical analysis and engagement with the literature, with the studies you're using. And my final key message is, at this part at least of the presentation, is to stop and to reflect and consider, what question are you being asked? What is the strongest evidence that you can find and use to support your argument? Okay, so a chance now to explore what I've been talking about in a little bit more depth, and I'm going to use some examples taken from the discussion forum, and it might be a good idea, if you're watching this as a recording, that you can stop, think, and start to write down the answer to the question, how effective is liraglutide for the treatment of obesity? What evidence would you use to support your answer? What information would you include? The question, on the face of it, seems very straightforward. It's short, it's precise. How effective is liraglutide for the treatment of obesity? What information would you include? What evidence would you use to support your answer? I think, my opinion, my advice would be, in addressing this particular question, you would be correct to look at randomized controlled trials or systematic reviews of randomized controlled trials that are directly addressing this question. We know that they're available. We should also be looking to use, I guess most of the time, the most contemporary, the most up-to-date evidence that we can find. But what about this word effective? How do we determine whether or not liraglutide is effective for the treatment of obesity and how effective it is? Okay. So in constructing your answer, whether it be in the case discussion forum or maybe in a report, the kind of information I personally would expect to see would be things like the age, the sex, the ethnicity of the participants taking part in the randomized controlled trial, the degree of obesity, whether there's existing comorbidity, the number of patients who've been treated, the number of people in the control group, and how patients are allocated, whether they're allocated on a one-to-one basis or whether the ratio of number treated to number of control patients is different. Of course, we're interested in effectiveness, so we would like to know what is the average or the typical change in the primary and secondary outcomes of the study. So the primary outcome is likely to be, in a study like this, loss in body weight or loss of body weight, but the study is also likely to have secondary outcomes, changes in blood lipids, changes in blood pressure, and so on. So we'd like to know, in addressing this question, what is the average change in the primary and secondary outcomes? But as well as reporting the average change, we'd like to know what is the variation around that change. Do those people who experience a reduction in body weight all experience much the same reduction in body weight, or is the reduction in body weight, does it vary quite considerably? Something else which I guess is very important to report so that we have a full understanding, a full answer to this particular question, is related to the precision of the estimates of the change. And this is generally reported as the 95% confidence interval. NNT stands for, some of you will know, I'm sure, number needed to treat. How many patients are needed to be do we need to treat with liraglutide in order to get an effective outcome? We also would like to know something about the unintended consequences of treatment, side effects, adverse events, and very importantly, of course, something about the strengths and weaknesses of the study, the summary and a summary and a conclusion. And of course, very importantly, whenever we are using the literature to construct answers and arguments, we should always reference the work thoroughly. And the university recommends the use of the Harvard referencing system. Okay? And when you do that, another tip, if you like, is you should consider whether you're citing a single primary study or whether you are citing a review article. Because, of course, a review article is a summary of multiple studies rather than a single primary study. So I hope that makes some sense to you. And I've just tried to summarize as best I can, bearing in mind what I'm trying to achieve with this particular talk, and that's about achieving excellence in posts within the group forum discussion and also in submitted written reports about how to fully answer this particular question: how effective is liraglutide for the treatment of obesity? And of course, I'm using a particular example, but the same principles would hold true for other questions, other similar questions that are about the effectiveness of particular treatments. Another example: what is the risk of type 2 diabetes in people who have obesity? Again, a very direct and very specific and clear question. What evidence would you use to support your answer, and what information would you include? In my opinion, because this question is asking about the risk of type 2 diabetes in people who have obesity, then we should be looking for prospective cohort studies or systematic reviews of prospective cohort studies, because these studies in our hierarchy of evidence will give us the best, strongest level of evidence for directly addressing this particular question. Again, the issue of using the most contemporary, up-to-date research, of course, is important. And the kind of information I might expect to see reported in a post, in a discussion forum, in a report, includes things like the age of the participants in the study, their sex, their ethnicity, their degree of obesity again, whether they have comorbidity. This time we're not talking about the number of participants in the study who are treated or are not treated, but we're talking about the number of participants who are exposed or who are not exposed. And the exposure in this case is obesity. So we're asking, what is the risk of type 2 diabetes in people with obesity compared to the risk of type 2 diabetes in people who do not have obesity? It would be nice to see something about the number of participants who were followed up in the prospective cohort study, something about the average length of follow-up, because this tells us something about how, this is telling us directly about how long patients have been followed, or participants, I should say, in this study rather than patients. Person time of follow-up, the number of participants who drop out, lost to follow-up. Confounding is a big weakness in many cohort studies. So we also need to know, how have the investigators in this study controlled confounding? And the measures of effect in a cohort study, such as this, would include things like the relative risk, the odds ratio, the hazard ratio. And whenever we report relative risks, odds ratios or hazard ratios, we should also report their precision or their 95% confidence interval. Again, demonstrating some critical analysis, identifying any particular strengths or weaknesses you see in this study, and providing a summary or conclusion. So, two different questions, both in the context of obesity, but one is about the effectiveness of treatment, the other one is about the risk of a particular outcome in relation to a particular exposure, as I said, in this case, obesity. To address those two questions requires looking at different types of studies. And I've included a third example, again from the field of diabetes. Slightly different question this time. How accurate is fasting plasma glucose for identifying individuals with elevated glycated hemoglobin? What evidence would you use to support your answer? What information would you include? So for this, I would suggest the ideal kinds of studies to be looking at are screening studies or systematic reviews of screening studies. And the kind of information that I would expect to see reported, again, would include something about the participant characteristics, their age, their sex, their ethnicity. And the results of this study are likely to be reported in terms of the sensitivity, the specificity, and the positive and negative predictive values associated with using fasting plasma glucose to identify individuals with elevated HbA1cs. So 3 different questions, each requiring evidence-based answers, and the evidence that you would use to provide and support your answers comes from different types of studies. That's the key point that I wish to make. Okay. Some further words of caution and some additional guidance, just to make you aware of a few things that you may not be aware of, and certainly from past experiences, I've certainly encountered students who are not aware of some of these issues. I've been speaking about the need to use evidence and high quality evidence and where we find high quality evidence. And we tend to think that high quality evidence is presented to us in the form of peer-reviewed papers in scientific journals, which is true. But we also need to be aware of predatory journals and publishers. And this is just a snapshot, a screen grab, if you like, from Wikipedia, which explains what we mean by predatory journals and predatory publishing. Put simply, just because a research paper is published in a journal and it looks genuine, it looks legitimate, you have to be aware of the large number nowadays of predatory journals that are available via the internet. There's no easy way of identifying predatory journals, but it's certainly worthwhile being aware of them. And there are guidelines available on the internet which help you to try and identify predatory journals. Of course, if you're utilizing journals such as the Lancet, the New England Journal of Medicine, the British Medical Journal, highly regarded, highly respected journals in the fields of medicine that many of you will work, then that's fine. But I think it is important to be aware, say, that sometimes, especially using the internet and internet search engines, we can quite easily stumble upon scientific research papers, articles, as I say, which look genuine, but they may not be of the quality that we would want to use. Another small piece of advice, and advice that I've certainly been given on many occasions, and that's to avoid just reading the abstract and or the conclusion of a research paper. It's very tempting to do this. Of course, we're all time pressured. We all are very busy people. We are trying to study and engage in academic research as well as doing our day jobs. And it's very, very easy, very tempting sometimes to just read abstracts and conclusions. Now, of course, this is fine if you are pushed for time and you just need to quickly get an appreciation of what a particular research paper is saying. But you need to be very careful about using, if you've only read the abstract and or the conclusion of a paper, that you would include that in any piece of written work. Of course, what you really must do is read the entire research paper understand why you're reading it, appreciate what type of research it is, and try and engage in some critical analysis. One final point, and I think it's a very important point that I'd like to make to you, and I'll do that with the help of the next 3 slides, is to suggest to you, to say to you that you should always look for and consider alternative evidence and opinions. And as I say, I think the best way for me to illustrate this point is to use an example. So on the slide in front of you, you'll see a research paper published in the journal Food and Nutrition Sciences, and it's about a highly controversial area, one of us that will an area in science that many of us will be familiar with, and it's about population dietary guidelines, and whether or not, you know, people in population should be eating more saturated fat, less saturated fat, and whether the guidelines are correct, if you like. And this paper argues that some of the dietary guidelines that have been applied in the United Kingdom, the USA and other countries are based upon the results and findings of the 7 countries study, which, as it says in the abstract, and I've underlined it for you, was seminal work behind the 1984 nutritional guidelines. Okay, so if you were not careful, you could quite easily read this particular paper. It's a peer-reviewed paper in a scientific journal in which the authors of this paper express an opinion based on their review of the literature, if you like, and their opinion of the 7 country studies and its strengths and weaknesses. And the same group of researchers have published a systematic review and a meta-analysis, as we've been hearing, you know, top of the hierarchy of evidence, high quality research, 1 star in some grading systems. It's published in Open Heart, it's peer reviewed, and similar conclusions are drawn, criticizing, if you like, the formulation of dietary recommendations on the basis that they were not supported by evidence from randomized controlled trials. However, the story doesn't end there. As I say, you could, if you're not careful, make a mistake by only referring to the previous study or the previous article published in Food and Nutrition Sciences and reading and utilizing this particular article in Open Heart. As I say, you would only be getting part of the story, because if you were to follow up some of the correspondence published in Open Heart, and I've given the link to the website on the particular slide, and also a link to another website, Science Media Centre, you will find that this particular systematic review and meta-analysis attracted a lot of attention, both in the media and also a large number of letters and subsequent commentary and correspondence that was published, to say, by the Science Media Centre and in the journal itself. And if you read that correspondence, it gives an alternative opinion. And just to follow up and finish that particular story, if you like, it also resulted in the production of this particular report by authors in the United States, which is a 54-page rebuttal and support of the work of Ansel Keys in the 7 country study. So I'm not taking one side or the other in this particular argument. It's a highly controversial area that attracts an awful lot of attention, both in the scientific literature and in the popular press. The point I'm simply making is that, as I said on the earlier slide, it's very important to always look for and to consider alternative evidence and opinions. So, to move along now to talk about something related to what we've been discussing, but slightly different. I've been making the point that it's not sufficient often to just simply read, and certainly it's not sufficient to read an abstract and a conclusion, but what we should all aim to become are critical readers and thinkers. Okay. Non-critical reading, if you're a non-critical reader, you're satisfied with recognizing what a particular text says and simply restating the key remarks. So this might be something that we encounter, in written reports that are submitted for assessment and in the group discussion forum, where students almost report verbatim, word for word, what researchers have reported in their particular research papers. In other words, there's no attempt to engage in any kind of meaningful critical analysis. Non-critical readers accept what they read as fact. If you become a critical reader, you're aiming to go beyond accepting and restating. To be a critical reader involves careful, active, reflective, and analytical reading. Of course, it takes more time, it's more of a challenge, but we should all aim to become critical readers and thinkers, not just people who accept what's written in front of us. Critical thinking involves evaluating information and ideas before deciding what to accept and believe. And I think, speaking personally, I would much rather see attempts in the discussion forum to engage in some critical reading, critical thinking, critical analysis, to provide some commentary about strengths and weaknesses of research that you use to inform your posts, rather than non-critical reading and simply the regurgitation, if you like, of information that we find written in research papers. So how do you become a critical reader? Be clear about why you are reading the research paper. We are all time limited. We all have many other things going on in our lives, in our personal lives, in our work lives. So it's important to be selective with what we read and to be clear about the reasons we're reading a particular research paper. When you read your research papers, identify any possible sources of bias by considering the author's affiliations and funding sources. It's almost one of the first things that we should do when we read a research paper is consider who are the authors, where do they work, what are their affiliations, is there any evidence in this research paper that the findings could be influenced, if you like, by the funding source. Read research papers with skepticism. Look out for weaknesses and limitations. Look for alternative interpretations of the work and unsubstantiated claims in the discussion section. There is guidelines, or I should say there are guidelines available to us to help us to become more critical readers when we consider and when we read our research papers. And here's a simple list, if you like, some questions to ask yourself when you read a research paper. I'm not going to read out every single line to you, but there are guidelines available to help us to become more critical in our reading and to become better at critical analysis. And here's a list, not an exclusive list, there are many other resources available, but a good starting point. Here are some useful resources for critical appraisal and evidence-based medicine. And I would just like to finish this particular part of the talk by addressing this question, because I've been talking about the need to utilise not just evidence, but to try and utilise the best available evidence when you're constructing your arguments, your work. How do you find the best evidence? Well, one thing you, I guess, shouldn't do, but it's very tempting to do it, and that's just to type a keyword into Google. Ideally, what we should do is think about we should develop a search strategy, identifying key dates, keywords, the relevant databases that we need to use to identify the types of research and the high quality research that we want to use in our work. So there are a range of electronic sources of evidence available to you via the university library. Google Scholar, of course, is widely available, but consider using Science Direct, the Cochrane database, PubMed or Medline, Embase, Ovid. As I'm sure you're aware, there are lots of these databases available, and it's good practice to become familiar with some of them and to become fairly well skilled and equipped to use these databases to search for the information that we need. And finally, to try and finish, if you like, on something hopefully which you'll find helpful and a little bit lighter than what we've been talking about, and I'd like to provide you some tips for good scientific writing. What we like to see in both, of course, the written report, the individual report, and in a discussion forum is a high quality of scientific writing. So these slides will be available to you, so you can stop and you can refer back to them whenever you need to, or if you need to. But I would suggest certainly following these guidelines. Avoid the following. Avoid using adjectives that add subjectivity to your work. Very inadequate should be simply inadequate. Slightly flawed should be flawed. The words very and slightly there don't add anything really other than some subjectivity. Try and avoid using journalistic terms. The population are crying out for more exercise is actually a particular sentence which I've seen in a piece of written work. I would suggest that a more appropriate term could be the population would benefit from more exercise. Avoid writing as if you are texting, tweeting or emailing. And also avoid the indiscriminate and incorrect use of exclamation marks, colons, capital letters and other punctuation marks. As I've demonstrated in my example, the study has several weaknesses, doesn't require an exclamation mark. Also avoid stating research observations as fact or as the undisputed truth. The truth is only the truth until better evidence shows otherwise. It's much better to talk about the evidence suggests, or maybe the evidence strongly suggests, rather than talking about research observations as being fact. Also try and avoid quoting directly unless there is a good reason to do so. And I've provided a quote which many of you will be familiar with, which I guess, would be a worthwhile quote. As to diseases, make a habit of two things: to help or at least to do no harm. Is a form of words worthy of quotation. The words which I've given below are taken directly from a research paper in the European Journal of Clinical Nutrition 2010. Nevertheless, the ViScan system, which is a system for measuring body fat basically, may still prove to be a valuable motivational instrument for the health practitioner with a possible future role in screening for abdominal obesity. Those are the exact words of the authors of that research paper, and they don't need quoting. Much better if you use a piece of research like that to paraphrase using your own words. try and avoid as much as you can using phrases such as "in my opinion" or "I think this is." I say as much as possible because there might be instances where it's perfectly appropriate to start a sentence by saying "in my opinion," but it's much better to back up those opinions by providing supporting evidence. So instead, try and use phrases such as "based on the evidence, one interpretation of," and you can fill in the rest of that sentence. Try and avoid writing in the first person voice. For example, "I will be searching using the PubMed database," but aim to write in the third person voice. "The PubMed database was searched." And if you're not fully sure about what this means, then again I would direct you to a number of different website based resources that can provide information about this. Something that I guess I see quite frequently is where people cite continuously using one source. It's difficult to avoid. Clearly, if you're utilizing a piece of work, a piece of research, which is extremely important, and you're using it repeatedly in constructing your argument, then rather than citing it continuously, a simple tip would be just to make it clear to the person who's reading your work that you will be using that one piece of work quite extensively, and argue why you'd be doing that. Importantly, avoid describing when you've been asked to explain, discuss, or analyze. If you just think about that for a moment, the discussion forum is perhaps called the discussion forum for a particular reason. Discussion implies the need to engage in critical analysis, to provide alternative opinions, and to go beyond simply trying to describe what the research evidence tells us. Okay, so try always to discuss, try and be analytical, explain difficult concepts when they need explaining. Try and avoid using old studies unless there's a very good reason why you're using an old study. And if you are using an old study that one might think is out of date, but you have a good reason for doing it, then state in your work why you're relying on an old study. Does it have particular strengths and weaknesses? Did it break new ground? Make it clear that you fully understand why it is you're using that particular piece of research in your work. Try and avoid using websites to support your answer, unless, of course, you're utilizing a website that we can rely upon. Websites such as the American Diabetes Association, the World Health Organization, Cancer Research UK, and so on. They might be appropriate sources of information if you're looking for perhaps some statistics around the prevalence or the incidence of a disease. But much better to try and avoid using those websites and to go to the kinds of studies that we've been talking about in this presentation: primary studies and secondary studies. Try and avoid completing your work in a hurry. It's easier said than done, but plan your work in plenty of time. Give yourself time to identify the literature, the studies that you need to read. Give yourself time to read those studies and to interpret them. An interpretation needs critical appraisal. And despite the fact that I used Wikipedia earlier on in this presentation to talk about predatory journals, try at all times if you can to avoid using Wikipedia other than for your own rapid reading. And my penultimate slide is I would suggest that you try and do the following. I've told you what you should try and avoid doing. Now I'll give you a couple of pointers on what I think you should try and do. Be selective with the research and the evidence that you use and understand why you've used it. That, in a nutshell, is what this 45-minute talk has really been about. being selective, understanding the nature of the research and the evidence that you're using to support your work. Reference your work accurately and consistently. At all times, avoid plagiarism. The university provides very clear guidelines on what plagiarism is and the need to avoid plagiarism. It is a serious academic offence, and it should be avoided. So make sure you reference your work accurately and consistently. If you really are paying, great attention to detail, one common mistake that I see is sometimes people might write something such as studies show, and then they don't provide a reference. So whenever I see the words studies show, I'm immediately looking for a reference. Which studies? Try and show some critical analysis. This can mean acknowledging excellent research as well as highlighting weaknesses. Don't fall into that trap. Don't think that critical analysis is only about identifying weaknesses in studies. If studies are, extraordinarily well conducted to the highest possible scientific standards, then that's worth acknowledging in any discussion post or piece of work as well. And finally, I would say, aim for quality over quantity. Of course, certain pieces of work have word targets attached to them, if you like, and you should always make use of the word target. If you're allowed to use 1,500 words for a particular piece of work, aim to use 1,500 words. But the important thing is to go for quality over quantity. Construct a careful argument that addresses the question you have been given and not the one that you want to answer. Okay, I think that's an important point. Make sure you address the question head on. And I think that brings, oh no, I've got one slide left. If you're unsure about the question, seek some clarification. Organize your writing with a clear structure. Use headings and subheadings. Even if you think it's helpful, use numbered paragraphs. Often if you're writing an extended piece of work, rather than repeating yourself, it's sometimes useful to have numbered paragraphs, and you can refer your reader back to a particular paragraph with a particular number. Help your readers by signposting. For example, somewhere in your post or somewhere in a piece of written work, you might say further information can be found in a particular resource. Remember that the discussion forum is a team effort, and that team effort, when harnessed, can really produce an excellent source of information that benefits everybody. Ensure you write succinctly and precisely, and proofread your work before submission. I've talked about plagiarism briefly, so always ensure that you use the Harvard referencing system. I think other speakers have probably already talked to you about utilizing the criteria that are provided for each assessment. In striving to achieve excellence, make sure you know what is required to achieve that A grade by referring to the assessment criteria. Try not to be anxious, as I know some people are, certainly at the beginning of the first week of the first discussion forum. Start with some short, simple posts. Build your confidence and get into the habit, the routine, the flow of contributing to the discussion forum. Importantly, have fun and enjoy the experience. Share information sometimes it's off subject. That's certainly something that I always try and do and encourage when I'm tutoring, is to invite people to add information which I say is off subject to the discussion forum, and to ask questions of one another. And I'm sure that if you have any questions, the staff at Diploma MSc would be more than happy to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Okay, so that is the end of the Diploma MSc webinar, the induction day. So I'd just like to thank you for joining us, and I'd also like to thank our speakers, Dr. Ruth Davis, Dr. Carl New, Simon Williams and Lou Wallace from the university. I hope that you found all the information useful, and we look forward to you beginning your course. Thank you. Bye.